Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar about the Egyptian Fintech ecosystem. I'm Sajanan, the project coordinator at the Africa Innovation Lab. So just to remind you, the Africa Innovation Lab is an initiative of the Casablanca State region in Morocco and Casablanca Finance City that has a specific goal of federating the fintech ecosystem in Morocco. So how do we do that? By actually connecting the different actors of the ecosystem, the regulators, the corporates, and of course the startups. And also we try to develop those startups by organizing some acceleration programs or by helping them, by connecting them to potential clients or partners. The idea is to actually kind of like try to learn from all the other ecosystems that we have in Africa and to help them grow beyond Morocco. And one of the best ecosystems that we could learn from is the Egyptian one. So this is the best transition that I could have to actually introduce you to this webinar, where we are going to learn a lot of things about this ecosystem that grew to become not the third, but in the top 3 in Africa. And I'm saying top 3 because it has some particularities that the other top 2 don't have. And I'm talking about Nigeria and Kenya being an Arabic country that is close to the Middle East and so on. So we won't be saying that it's the third ecosystem, but for me, it's the top 3 that has some cons and pros, of course, in comparison to the other 2. So with no further waiting, we have an amazing panel today. And to start and kickstart this webinar, and before actually kickstarting it, I just want to remind you about some features in Zoom. So you can actually, of course, ask all your questions in the Q&A session that you have below in either your meeting app or on your desktop client on your desktop. So you can just click on Q&A, ask your questions. I will handle that in the end of the session, where we'll be having a Q&A session. There might be some polls that you will see that. And to kickstart this event, I will introduce you to an amazing person that I had the chance to meet through the organization of this webinar. Noha Shakir was the founder and Secretary General of the Egyptian Fintech Association, and she's also the co-founder and Vice President General of the Africa Fintech Network. So she will be actually introducing this webinar by sharing some insights. She was in this ecosystem from the beginning, so she will be sharing with us some secrets, some anecdotes maybe, and some insights about this ecosystem. I warn you, she's an amazing person because she has a great energy, a super generosity, but also the expertise too, and she knows what she's talking about. So with no further waiting, Noha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Saad. بجد يعني you've set the standard and the floor really, really high. I just hope I don't disappoint.
You won't, for sure.
الكلام اللطيف اللي انت قلته. Thank you very much for your kind words. Actually, I consider myself lucky and to have actually been blessed by the fact that I was part of the fintech ecosystem, working amongst, at the very beginning, a few mainly gentlemen who have contributed to building that fintech ecosystem early on. I mean, the entire story started to actually become noticeable perhaps year 2014 or so. So we are talking about an ecosystem that's 8 years old or so. So we haven't been working on that for quite some time, but again, because the market has the capacity and a certain characteristics that makes an ecosystem successful, and we are going to come to those and elaborate a little bit about each and every one of those enablers in there. Some of them were actually blessed with as a country, and the rest were actually developed and grown by market enablers, regulators, and the like. So thank you very much for having us today. Thank you for what you've said about the Egyptian market, the fintech ecosystem and the Egyptian market. There is still a lot of work that needs to be done. As I told you over the telephone, we are really critical of ourselves. So we're really humbled by the fact that, like, all the kind words that you've said and the fact that you consider us as an ecosystem to learn from. Definitely there is much learning in there, but we still have a long, long way to go. But instead of reinventing the wheel, as we say, we always reach out to potential partners and neighboring countries to make sure that we do the benchmarking, we learn the lessons that were already learned, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much for having us in here. And I'm going to tell you a story, everybody, because I'm not really fond of presentations. How did we make it? What are the market characteristics and enablers on the ground that made us get where we are? And where we started, where we are today as well. We are going to be shedding some light on that prior to getting into our panel discussion, answering questions from the audience, hopefully, who are going to be sharing the questions in there. So if we look at the year 2014, we had 2 fintech startups in the country. We had one incubator that was run by the government, mainly as part of the Ministry of Telecommunications, and our partnership with NTRA, which is the regulator for the telecommunications companies in there. And in the year 2021, we have 112 fintech startups that are there on the ground. In the year 2014, the investments that were channeled and put into fintech startups were 0.9 million. In year 2021, noting that we had COVID in there, and the majority of the countries actually showed a decline in the investments that were already raised by startups, including fintech startups. We actually managed to close around, oh God, now I'm missing the numbers. Where's Basil to come to my rescue?
160 million. That was the fintech out of.
Okay, so Omar came to my rescue, being the startup was raising money. Thank you very much. So we started with $0.9 million, and then we ended up in the year 2021 raising 160, coming third after Kenya and Nigeria in Africa as markets when it comes to the amounts of investments channeled into fintechs in there. Of course, that did not happen overnight. As we said, we went through the evolution cycle of any fintech ecosystem in there. We started with one incubator. Now we have like 6 or 7 of those running all year long. We have hackathons that run all year long, serving certain organizations who run their own innovation programs by the government, by venture capital funds, by partners, development partners on the ground, like the German Development Bank, like the UK Aid, the French Trésor, like many other development agencies operating on the ground. So we have those up and running. The market is there, and that's the first enabler for a successful ecosystem in general, whether fintech or not. So the demand has to be there. We are talking about 120 million Egyptians. The majority of those do not have access to financial services. And when I say access, I'm not talking about having a bank account or having a prepaid card. I mean having the access to customized financial services that are properly priced to their needs as individuals or as mainly micro, small, and medium businesses, because the larger institutes have access to debt through banks. They can facilitate their own fundraising, and they do not have any issues in there. So we had a market that was thirsty for financial services, and the incumbents, like the financial industry as it is, or as it was, banks, insurance companies, leasing companies, factoring companies, even the investment banks and the like, they weren't exactly ready to serve that segment. Not because they're bad or because they don't want to serve everybody, but because they definitely did not have the tools, given the technological state that was back then. They carry a lot of overheads. They work through brick and mortar models for the distribution, customer onboarding, and servicing. So they actually spend a lot of money to onboard customers and serve them. So for them to settle with really thin profit margins associated with the smaller companies and individuals who do not have that large ticket sizes that can support their profitability, they made the right economic decision, which is to go with a fewer number of customers to onboard and serve, hence cutting costs somehow and improving their profitability while serving that minimum number of customers. Technology made things different. Now the majority of the insurance companies are looking into building digital channels and the like. The barrier to entry is still there, which is the lack of understanding to the nature of those segments in there. And it's going to take some time for the incumbents in the financial industry to catch up to startups and fintechs. Of course, I'm the biggest fan and supporter, because I do believe that fintech startups are better positioned to serve bottom of the pyramid MSMEs, and they are best suited to be customer-centric, to customize solutions, to be agile on the ground, to offer pricing that is suitable to people. With incumbents, established financial institutions, the story is completely, utterly different. They are working on it, now working on partnerships with fintechs of all segments, which is great, a great start. We are going to see an evolution in there. Fintechs growing to become a more comprehensive financial service providers, banks growing into fintechs, relying on technology mainly to onboard and serve customers. Of course, that is going to be in the future, not very much foreseeable future for this part of the world, but for the rest of the world, it is there. So aside from the market size, what other enablers did we have in there? The talents, like the people who are educated, who have the understanding of the industry, who can actually build a startup that can outlive the challenges that are there on the ground. If you look at the 112 startups that are up and running in here, 33% of the founders actually hold a master's degree in some sort of discipline in there. So that says a lot about the talent that we have in here, whether they're techies, whether they are financiers or the like, that was also there. And those are the two key drivers to build an ecosystem. You have the market size, the demand is there. So whatever you develop is going to be sold. Not whatever, of course, as long as it meets the customer needs and requirements, and it is a perfect fit to that market. And you also have the talents, the hire from the talents who can actually build the startups and put it in there. If you, a question was raised in the year 2016, what was the biggest challenge that fintech startups actually face on the ground when they want to start a business and operate in Egypt? And I would always answer that it's the regulatory environment and seen that was the biggest obstacle in there. The second biggest obstacle was access to funding for the startups once they have established. The government, starting the year 2016, establishing the Payment Council and a memorandum of understanding between all the regulators operating on the ground. So we have a regulator for banks, that's the central bank. We have a regulator for non-banking financial services, which is the FRA, the Financial Regulatory Authority. We have the NTRA, which again regulates the telecommunications. All those have to come together and work together if you want to grow a fintech ecosystem that is supportive. If we look at the past 2016 until today, the central bank has issued how many regulations? So they had one for the POSs and then what we call them agents on the ground to support onboarding customers, mass onboarding of customers. They had the cashless payments law. Then they had, they amended the banking law, the existing law as well, to support innovation within the banking industry. The payment providers, that we call them PSPs, as well as the POS, that's another law. Then the digital banking regulation and law was there also and up and running. And then the interoperability to facilitate. And interoperability was not just the law, but also the infrastructure that enables the interoperability amongst various payment service providers in there. And that's only the central bank. The Financial Regulatory Authority, the central bank as well, they developed the nationwide fintech strategy, and I was honored and happy to be part of the team that developed that and made sure it came out to life. The Financial Regulatory Authority as well, they worked on their own fintech regulation. They have just launched that to support insurance companies, leasing companies, factoring companies, investment banks and vehicles and the like. And we still have gaps in the market that are not yet regulated. An example of that is the crowdfunding. And I will continue to mention that until they come together and develop the regulation, which they promise they are like currently working on, whether it's debt or equity. And most probably it's going to be a joint initiative between the Central Bank of Egypt and FRA. So a lot of work. Then you had the NTRA with the consumer protection laws and the like, cybersecurity, working on up and running. So the regulatory reforms that took place over the past 6 years were absolutely unprecedented. The mindset of the regulators has changed. We used to send them letters and they used to respond back in letters. And that was like in the past. Now we exchange emails, phone calls, we meet, they reach out to the ecosystem and the enablers in there to get the insights and the like. The last pillar that is there, of course, that's the access to funding. And perhaps Basil is more suited to cover that in there. Sure. We started, with like one or two venture capital funds who were even shy to deploy money in early stage startups, because again, we were working in a gray regulatory area. Nobody knew where they're hitting, market risks that are there. So things weren't exactly that much. Now there's a huge competition on the existing startups on the ground. We find it difficult as investors to actually create and have access to the pipeline of investable deals to actually put money in. And that was the fourth enabler in there. So the market size, then the talents, then the regulatory reform, as well as the access to funding. This is the story, in short, what we did, what happened, how we progressed. I hope you enjoyed the story and I wasn't boring I tried my best.
Not at all, not at all. And actually, this is the best transition because you actually connected that to the different people who are in the panel next. So we will be having someone who actually lived in this regulatory movement, if I can say it like this. We have an investor with us, and we have also a startup that is actually successful and hopefully will keep being successful. So, you know what? You gave me the best transition to go to the panel, and I won't be moderating the panel. Instead, I will be introducing you to Kenza Lahlu, who is an active investor in Africa. She's the general manager of Outliers Ventures. She's super active in the startup ecosystem. She was super active in the Moroccan startup ecosystem first. Then she launched her VC fund for seed funding, and now she's active all across Africa. So Kenza, I will let you introduce us to the participants to the panel. So the floor is yours. And thank you once again, Noha. But you stay with us, of course.
Thank you so much, Saad. And thank you everyone for joining. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm very excited about this panel. So as Saad mentioned, I'm the general partner at Outliers Ventures, early stage VC fund focused on Africa. We are investing in 4 main markets, Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, and Kenya. And we've been very active in Egypt and also backing fintech companies. So we've definitely seen the rise of the Egyptian scene, and especially now the fintech space. So let's dive in and understand a bit better what happened and what are the enablers of this growth. So the way I would like to take this panel is to do in two steps. So first, I would love for you as speakers to introduce yourself, tell us a bit more about what you do so that we can understand the companies you are building or the companies that you've invested in this space. And then we can go to the regulatory side and understand better the enablers and what help it what is helping this ecosystem to grow. So let's start with you, Basil, if you'd like. So you are the co-founder of Global Ventures and also co-founder and general partner at Include Ventures, a fintech-focused VC fund for Egypt. I would love for you to introduce yourself and also tell us a bit more about the companies that you've backed in this space.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Noha, and thanks, everybody. It's great to be on this panel, and Kenza for moderating today. I'll keep it brief because I think, Q&A is always the fun part, I think, of panels, and I also think hopefully a bit of banter between us and so on. And I've been known to be a little bit controversial on panels just to get the discussions going. So don't mind me if I do. I started my career in venture. It was completely coincidence. I ended up in California working for a CVC for Reuters. This was back in 1997, so it gives you a little bit of an idea of my age, and I apologize for that, but it makes me feel sometimes a bit old. But back then we were investing in Netscape, VeriSign, WebEx, and companies like that. It was the Internet 1.0. And ironically, it was a great boom time, very not dissimilar to the last few years of what we've seen. And it was also the dot-com crash, right, in 2001, 2002. And again, not dissimilar to what we're seeing today, a lot of corrections, a lot of fixing. And I'm sure we'll end up talking about that. Did my MBA and then ran a bunch of businesses. The last business I ran was a $3.5 billion business sold to a private equity fund out in Canada. I was their president and CEO of that business and sold it on behalf of the shareholders to a private equity. And then I kind of ended up in a weird situation because I, without a job, trying to figure out what to do next and trying to sit there and kind of go, what's trending in the world? And it was 2016, end of 15, beginning of 16. And I had moved my family back from DC to Dubai and kind of realized technology was really starting to become something in the region. We had gone past the initial phase of e-commerce, if you like, which is always the kind of where it starts and always represents a big part of the market. But I came out of financial services, having worked for Reuters and other companies, Symphony and so on in the space. And I could see that fintech was finally starting to come of age in the region. We knew what was happening, obviously, in Europe and in the States in 2008 after the crisis there, and kind of the decoupling, if you like, or of financial services, different components, asset management, credit, etc. And you could see the same happening in the region. And the region went through exactly the same thing, right? Kind of what Noha described, a little bit of fear, and then acceptance, and fear, denial, acceptance. I don't know what the stages are, but we went through all the stages. And I think, especially in Egypt, in the last couple of years, we've gone into a full throttle of momentum around the space, with still a lot of opportunities to go after. I worked with Noor Sweid, who set up Global Ventures. I joined her as a GP. We did a couple of funds, and the first fund ended up allocating about actually 50% of the companies into fintech. So we did PayMob, which I'm sure you're aware of. We did one of Omar's competitors, NowPay. We also did a company called People, which is for the unbanked in Africa. We did Team App out in Nigeria, which is a Fawri. So we did a bunch of what I call infrastructure plays, if you like, in the fintech space. And then last year, and Noha mentioned this already, the government here and a number of investors took an initiative to provide additional capital to the fintech space on the back of the momentum that was building and the regulation that was opening up. And we launched Include by Global Ventures. Include is really a fund anchored by the major banks, Bank Masr, Bank Al-Qahira, Bank Al-Ahli, here in National Bank of Egypt, here in Egypt, and includes investors from around the world, which we'll be announcing at our second close in a few weeks. So we'll let you know about those names when they come out. But basically, a bunch of people took notice that Egypt is really underpenetrated on a scale, on all the criteria that you'd look at. Egypt still had a lot of upside and a lot of opportunities, and entrepreneurs like Omar and Ahmed obviously play a fundamental role in filling in those opportunities and capturing them with a lot of upside potential. And so we launched the fund in March. We did 4 investments at the beginning. Khazna was definitely one of our proudest investments to come into, and I'm sure Omar will describe that more. We did Muzera, which is really helping financing the farmer working capital cycle. We did Lucky, which is really coming out of the loyalty and into the BNPL kind of space. And we also put additional capital into PayMob. So PayMob just completed a $50 million round led by PayPal Ventures and Cora Capital and a few international investors. Nora mentioned something that was very important that I wanted to build on here, which is, there was a lot of catalyzation, by local investors in terms of seed investment and angel investing and incubators. There was a lot of DFIs, but what's really notable over the last 24 months is international investors. So we're talking about people like Sequoia, Tiger, and other private capital starting to take notice of Egypt. And I mentioned that because I do think it's an important thing to point out, right? It shows evolution in the market. And this was a collective effort by a lot of the entrepreneurs reaching out to global investors, partly because there was a lack of capital regionally, if you like, or locally, and partly because they had built some really attractive businesses. And I'm proud of kind of the types of names that we've started to see coming into the market. And I'm aware of a couple of deals going on right now that are actually going to even be more exciting in terms of the type of investors coming into Egypt. My message is momentum builds on itself. You have to start somewhere. It always is tougher. At the beginning, going from 0 to 1 is tough. That's the hardest part. But once you get the momentum, as I'm sure Ahmed and Omar will say, you start to see that build on itself, not just from the business side, but also from the investment side. Now, the market conditions we're in, it's going to be an interesting time for the next 12 at least months. But I think the good businesses will always find a way to continue growing and developing themselves.
Great, thank you so much, Bessel. So this is a great transition to understand a bit better what are those fintech companies and what are those fintech founders solving for, what challenges are they tackling. So Omar, I'd love to start with you. So you're a co-founder and CEO of Khazna, a company that is a credit-led financial super app with a focus on the underserved population. Could you tell us a bit more about Khazna? What problem are you solving, and walk us through your equity journey?
Sure.
Omar, we lost you. Okay, so maybe by the time Omar comes back, we can go to you, Ahmed. Omar, are you back?
No, I'm back. Can you hear me?
Great. Okay, perfect. So you can go ahead.
Sorry, it's a bad connection. So yeah, again, Khazna is a credit-led, as I mentioned, financial super app with a focus on middle and low income Egyptians, individuals and micro businesses. So we've been in operations for 2 years now. We are very happy about where we are today. Like our super app includes multiple functionalities, cash credit, offline buy now, pay later, bill payment, transfers. And we recently launched the Khazna card. So the first of its kind in Egypt that is linked to a mobile app. So we're very proud of that. And again, like with a primary focus on, further expanding financial inclusion and access to credit among Egypt's underbanked. So this is a little bit about Khazna.
Awesome. And tell us a bit more about what, your equity journey and how have you been able to raise funding and how much you've raised now?
Yeah, we raised we raised so far $50 million in total in equity and venture debt from institutional investors. It's just a start. If you look at the market and how much like capacity it has, so hopefully we'll be raising more funding. I think we're very lucky, to close our very first round of funding just before COVID hit. So early Q1 of 2020. And that was led by Algebra Ventures here in Egypt and with the participation of Axion Venture Labs from the US. It was Axion's first ever investment in Egypt. So we, throughout our journey, with our international investors, a big part of what we actually, present or sell to the investors is Egypt and the story about Egypt and why it's such an attractive market in general, but why now, timing-wise, is the right time to basically invest in Egypt.
Perfect, thank you. So up to you, Ahmed. So you are the co-founder at Ego, a fintech company providing financing to SMEs and invoice factoring. Would love to hear more about what is Ego doing and what problem are you solving? And what?
Sure. To start with, so basically, a quick brief about myself. So basically, I'm a lawyer by education. I guess I was one of the lucky ones to actually join a couple of the main administrative bodies in Egypt. So basically, I got the chance to work alongside the chairman of the Financial Regulatory Authority back at 2018 when I joined. The idea was actually to develop this best practice course of action when it came to developing new legislations, whether it's fintech related or more likely the financial services itself in general. And from there, I was lucky enough to move to one of the major law firms in the Middle East, Al-Tamimi, where again, was super lucky to work most of the work for Global Ventures on most of the transactions. And this is when I realized how important the fintech society is getting bigger and bigger. And also from there, joined the prosecution for a short bit, where I saw how underserved is the SMEs community as I joined as a district attorney for a commercial district in Egypt. And finally, going back to a law firm where actually I assisted in building this fintech mandate and innovation to assist startups at different levels, whether it's investment, whether it's finding the best legal structure, offshore or onshore. And actually now we here at Agile, we saw this market opportunity, how the SMEs community is much underserved, how there is no customization, as Noha said, tapping into the SMEs. We wanted to cater for the Muslim community. And one of the things we're amazed actually to see in Egypt, that we're a Muslim country in general, and basically there is no whatsoever culturally relevant or Islamic finance products that actually cater the needs of the segment we're trying to work on. So basically, this is what we're doing. We're extending credit limits in the form of trade finance to the underserved SMEs, but we're doing it in a bit of different way. We're doing it in an asset-backed way to make sure that's Sharia compliant, as we can say, for the Muslim community. And also we're focusing on customizing the product. So we're not working this all verticals at the same time. We're focusing on industry by industry to actually tailor the experience towards the needs of this certain segment and then move to the next segment. So this is in a nutshell what we're doing right now. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So this is very interesting. So before becoming an entrepreneur, actually, you, among the different experiences that you had, you work with the regulator on the fintech laws and on providing fintech licenses to startups. So we will definitely get back to you to understand this journey and get some tips for startups and maybe understand just for the Moroccan ecosystem what works and what doesn't. So let's get into this now. The big question, or the most important part, the regulatory space, the regulatory sector. So what are the enablers? What did the government or the regulator did well for the fintech ecosystem to be able to grow? And what are the best practices of this? And maybe to start, maybe it would be great to explain a bit more, how does it work? Because here in Morocco, we only have the central bank that regulates the sector. But I know that in Egypt, you have two regulatory bodies, so the central bank and the FRR. So it would be great to explain to the audience how it's structured and how it works. Who would like to go for this question? And I would love to hear from you, each of you, what are the main enablers in your opinion?
Sure, if you'd like me to give a quick overview about this idea. So basically in Egypt, we do adopt a dual system when it comes to financial regulators. We have the Central Bank of Egypt, and basically the central bank regulates the banking activities. And when it comes to the fintech space, it also holds the hand when it comes to payment providers, to wallet providers, to issuing your own co-branded prepaid card. So basically, if you're providing any kind of banking activities or banking related activities as being a facilitator or aggregator in the digital payments space, or you're a wallet provider of any kind, whether it's an open loop wallet, it's a closed loop wallet. And as well as the central bank has actually launched a sandbox a couple of years backwards. And one of the first cohorts was actually trying to regulate the AKYC, especially when it comes to the financial services. Unfortunately, until this moment, they still haven't reached out the perfect regulation to regulate this space, which is the digital identity or the AKYC. And from there as well, they moved to the second cohort, looking into ideas like the Ruska models and the crowdfunding. So hopefully this will get by soon. We're hearing great news about it. And to add on, the central bank has this great initiative that was launched lately, which is they're trying to collaborate and build a better infrastructure. So now we have what we call the InstaPay, which actually connects all whether you're having a bank account, you're having a mobile wallet, you're having a telecommunication wallet. Basically, you have instant access to fund your account and actually transfer amounts from one wallet to a banking account or whatever form you need to do so. So this is one of the great things. And we're hearing from the central bank that they're going to avail this service to startups and fintechs where they can actually work upon this infrastructure and enhance it for better user experience. And to jump on to the Financial Regulatory Authority, basically, in general, the Financial Regulatory Authority regulates 6 main activities. In general, they are the capital markets, which involves the investment funds, the stock exchanges, if you're providing any kind of investment products, and they have the insurance sector, which is one of the biggest sectors in Egypt, and they have the buy now, pay later, and which was recently issued at 2020, called the consumer finance. And also we have the factoring. They regulate the factoring companies, which is basically a kind of invoice financing. And they have also the microfinance, which was amended a couple of years back to become the mid, small, and micro enterprises. So basically, they hold all the non-banking financial activities. And recently, at late 2021, they launched the Fintech Law. It didn't come in hand in the best shape that we thought it would be. So basically, when we participated as community members, they invited a couple of community members to decide upon the law. And I do believe this is one of the great things that the regulators actually adopted in the past years, which is actually inviting a couple of stakeholders to the table when it comes to issuing new regulations to hear more about what they actually need in this space. And basically, we had a lot of activities that was inserted in the law, but was removed before its issuance, including crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, and a lot of other activities, because basically one of the bad things about having this dual system is you always find this space between the central bank and the financial regulatory authority. So basically crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending was one of the main topics of discussion, whether they will be handed to the central bank to regulate them or handed to the financial regulatory authority to actually regulate them. The idea is, if you're looking to explore the space within the payment activities related to the banking activities, basically you do not have direct contact with the central bank. So what happens is you need to partner with an existing local bank, and they do in turn assist you in applying for an approval as you become an agent for this bank within the service you're trying to provide. So there is no direct contact whatsoever between startup or a fintech and the central bank. And on the other hand, when it comes to financial regulatory authority, basically you're the startup or the fintech is the one who directly applies for the license. So there are some requirements and prerequisites you need to take into consideration before applying for the license. So this is in brief how the regulatory system works in Egypt.
Okay, very good. So the main insight from this is that the central bank is regulating bank activities, and the FR is the one dealing with fintechs and regulating non-banking activities, which is very important because it gives more agility and better access for fintechs. Okay, great. Would love to hear more about what do you think, Bassel, in your opinion, what do you think are the main enablers to unlock this space, and what did the government or the regulator did well that boosted the fintech space growth?
There's so many parts to that question. So I'm gonna try to be brief. I guess I'll say this, right? I give a lot of credit to the founders, frankly, and to people like Noha and others who took the time to really communicate and explain, educate, if you like, sometimes, and raise the level of discussion with the regulator. And this shouldn't be underestimated, right? The number of stories that I can tell you about founders who've spent endless hours sitting in the offices of the regulator, talking about what they want to do and not really taking no for an answer, right? Would be endless and countless and so on. And so a lot of credit obviously goes to the regulator for listening and adapting and eventually making things happen. And I think that Russia in particular at the what's it called at the central bank, with the Russian Enigma at the central bank, working with the fintechs and enabling the sandbox, all of these things obviously created momentum. But there is a world and a time before it, Kenza, and knowing some of the differences to Morocco, if this is kind of the link back here, of just founders spending endless hours putting together materials, explanations on how they are helping rather than competing, how they are enabling, whether it's financial inclusion or or getting people's general standard of living up and so on. And I think that really, again, goes back to Ahmed, Omar, and the list is long of people who have done plenty of that. Of course, once the regulator began moving, both of them, the FRA and the central bank, and in some ways that competition helps a bit for sure. But it's once they started moving, the momentum really started to pick up very, very quickly over the last couple of years. So I guess that's what I would say are the things that drove it, if that makes sense. I don't think bypassing the regulator is the way to go in emerging markets, in my opinion. I just don't think that's a sustainable, investable way to go. Of course, some companies have pushed the envelope on definitions of things. So they found ways to do things that, people were like, that's a little bit gray, but let's give it a try and see what happens. And so they definitely pushed the line, but I think it was the conversations and the dialogue. And I'd rather have, you know, Omar or Ahmed tell you some of the stories of those discussions, because it would go on for how long, Omar? Weeks, months? How many days and hours did you spend at those, you know, at the banks and at the regulator talking about what you're trying to do?
No, years actually. It's not. You gotta really. I think before before starting Khazna, I was leading the expansion of a global fintech into MENA, into the region. And actually, some of the early and best deals I did was with the Barid Bank, BMCE, and BCP in Morocco. So I have great memories and great friendships over there. Yeah, I think it takes. We've been very lucky, you know, as was previously communicated by Ahmed and Isel and Noah about what happened in Egypt. You know, like we were very lucky. In 2017, there was, you know, like the establishment of the National Payments Council. Actually with the chairmanship of our president, so the president of the Republic, and it was like a decisive, you know, decision to drive financial inclusion top down, right? And this really has had a tremendous, you know, like impact from the central bank and the FRA in terms of devising new regulations, coming up with infrastructure, a national payment, system. One of them also driving financing, such as Include, which is the fund that is established by the National Bank of Egypt. My recommendations for, you know, like fintech is regulated for a good reason, and it should be regulated because it deals with people's money ultimately. So it has to be regulated in some shape or form. My advice for, you know, like fintechs is, and what we are doing, what we're still doing, you know, like we're still early stage, so we're still learning. So I cannot really claim that we made it, so we're still learning. But definitely early and continuous communication with the regulator is very important. You know, like informally or formally, you got to be in front of the regulator. They need to know you. They need to know what you're doing. So this is very important because it drives a lot there, like what you do and their agenda as well. So I think that's very important. It's very important to understand the country's policy. So I think each country is different in terms of what the priorities are. Is it really banking the unbanked, or is it focused on SMEs and merchant finance, or is it focused on, you know, like open banking? You know, like you need to really understand what the priorities of the countries and the regulators are, and align yourself accordingly. And similar to what the priorities are, you need to understand what the red lines are. So, for example, in Egypt, taking deposits is a big red line, right? Like I know it's the same in other countries as well. But so you can't take people's money and go and invest it and tell them, I'm going to get you 100% in 2 months, okay? So, like, if you take people's money in Egypt, you go to jail, full stop. So don't go to the regulator asking them to take a license to take deposits, right? Like, it's just like be mindful about, you know, like what you're asking for. At the end of the day, you'll be surprised, but all regulators understand very well, and the Central Bank of Morocco is extremely reform oriented and forward looking. Obviously, I'm biased because I think the Egyptian one has done a tremendous job, you know, like over the last 5 years. But again, you know, like all the regulators understand that anywhere around the world, not just in our region, innovation precedes regulation. So it's very normal for companies to innovate, push the envelope, you know, like do things that are not really there in the regulations written, and to engage with the regulator early on, and then for the regulator to come back and say, okay, wait a minute, I know what you're doing, let's sit down, let's expand on the regulation, right? Like let's add a small piece of regulation here or there. So this is very common, right? But like you gotta have a continuous dialogue, start early, have a continuous dialogue, and at the same time, be mindful, don't do stupid things, you know, like ultimately, that's those are my 2 cents here.
Thank you, Omar. And actually, my next question was for you. And so, great transition. Let's speak practical. So, would love to understand better how did you do it? Have you been able to start the business and then get the license? Did you need a license before starting? Because you're saying innovation first, and then regulations follow. That's true, and that's what pushes boundaries. And we see that happen in Egypt, in Nigeria, in Kenya, but in other markets, like Francophone markets, it's a different way of doing it. It's first regulation, and then the business can start working. And this is one of the the blockers of innovation in those markets. So would love to hear from your experience in Egypt, how did it work for you?
No, sure. So we, again, you know, like I was lucky enough to have been involved in fintech before starting Hasna. So I worked for 2 years with a global fintech that specializes in cross-border payments or remittances, and I helped them launch, you know, MENA, so Egypt, Morocco, Saudi, UAE, Lebanon, Jordan, and it is through this experience I started building some connections, you know, with the regulators. So I was very happy to have those relationships early on, and you know, like in 2019, late 2019, decided this is definitely the right time, given all the changes in regulations, all the support, and like really how progressive, you know, a central bank of Egypt is, right? Like, and how, you know, really supportive of fintech and innovation it has been, you know. So decided to venture out. We found the model. So initially, we launched our first product was a salary advance business, which is basically digitizing corporate employee loans, and which is a pain here in Egypt, similar to many other places in the region. You know, because banks shy away from, you know, providing short-term credit to, you know, middle and low-income workforce. What happens is that employers jump in and fill that gap, and it's obviously a headache. It's an annoying. So there's like a clear opportunity there. You know, like, is there a law called salary advance law? No, there isn't, right? But we had to be very close to the regulators. Know, how does this work? How do we develop this? Is this acceptable or not? Is this, you know, like within the red zone or not, right? So we had to be very close with them step by step. We are attending all the events, you know, like just be very close, understand what the direction is. At that point of time, there was a lot of talks about the new banking law, which was issued last October. One of the most comprehensive banking laws in the world, was developed by the Central Bank of Egypt, which includes a significant, you know, like fintech and digital banking component. So I think, again, you know, like very, very lucky. I can only speak about, you know, like with the regulator here in Egypt, but very lucky about how progressive they've been and how much of a two-way, you know, street.
Yeah, I think he froze.
You know, like can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
You froze
Yes,
for.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. So again. Sorry. So I was saying, you know, again, it takes a year to really develop and work on this, and you gotta be patient. You know, ultimately, this is not like a quick e-commerce play. You know, a regulated industry requires a lot of, you know, relationships and investing time and effort in those relationships in order to ultimately make it happen. We're happy as to where we are, but again, you know, like Egypt really is a hotspot. Like, if you want to start a fintech in the region, come to Egypt. You know, this is the right place. You have all the regulations you want. You have an extremely progressive regulator, 2 regulators. You have the infrastructure, national payment system. You like instant payment network. You have a fund that was set up by the 3 national banks that funds fintech. So honestly, it's I'm calling you guys from Saudi today, and my host tells me I have to go. Okay, so I might have to drop now. But again, you know, like it's definitely the right place to be, and happy to connect after the call and answer any questions.
Just to sum up what you just said, you said that you can, in Egypt, you can start a business in fintech and test it out, and then get regulated for it by working closely with the regulator. I don't know if you heard me, Omar, but yeah, I don't think you heard me, yes. Omar, right?
I think I heard you.
Okay, good, perfect. So is that correct?
Yeah, I think what I told you, the story, yes, absolutely. You need to, you know, again, you know, like it's, you need to be very close. Yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. Perfect.
Thank you. Sorry, guys, I gotta run. Thank you.
Thank you, Omar. See you.
Omar.
So I have a last question for Ahmed, and then we can open it for Q&A. Sure. So Ahmed, actually, to piggyback on this conversation, so something also important that I noticed investing in different markets is that in Egypt, you have fragmented licenses. While in Morocco, for example, we only have one big, like a banking license and the agency payment license. So could you tell us a bit more about this and give us examples of different licenses that exist and the playbook for companies to get one?
Sure. So basically, one of the main things that founders usually forget when they're starting the startup and they're trying to get regulated in the fintech space is basically the activity already existing. So probably if you're providing a lending activity whatsoever, whether it's lending to SMEs or lending to individuals, it has been there for years and years. But the idea of how are you providing the service? So basically providing the service through a mobile app or through a web application or this kind of technology that you're using doesn't change the real activity that you're trying to provide. So basically for at least 10 years ago, we had this back at 2014, we had this SMEs financing law. So basically, if you were providing financing to SMEs, whether you're doing it from a bank, you're doing it from a non-banking financial activities, it is there. So for startups like us, the regulatory map is already there. One of the closer journey I would like to share with you and the Global Ventures portfolio as well is Sunder. Sunder is basically an investing platform. And this is one of the journeys closest to my heart. So basically, back then when Ahmed Hamouda, founder, decided to start Sunder, he didn't have this idea whatsoever of what we're going to do. But when we sat down, when I heard more about the idea, we knew for a fact that a license existed, but the license was stopped by the regulator for the past 12 years because there were already too many companies in this area. So the idea was, and backing on what Noah said and what Basil said, it depends on the material of the founder at the end of the day. We were able to actually convince the regulator not only to reopen the licenses and grant Sunder a new brand license that wasn't granted from 12 years ago, but actually to also amend some of the existing regulations to meet the standards that Sunder needed to operate in Egypt. So this is one of the journeys that are really close to me. And one of the also fighters, I would say, in the system, and also Bassel mentioned, is Islam Shawi when he was starting Paymop back at 2015. This basically was a fight. So back then, there were no support whatsoever from investors, from regulators, from enablers that were supported to the startups. But Islam back then had this idea, and he had this core co-founders that actually pushed through the idea and was one of the very early payment providers in Egypt. And now they're reaping what they saw in the past years. And they're doing great. They're one of the prominent payment providers. So basically, it depends on how much do you want it, how much, or actually, what is your capabilities to support the idea. And as Omar said, of course, having this fintech is a sensitive matter. So at the end of the day, you have to have this mindset when it comes to what to say to the regulators and when to say it. And if you do not have this earlier capacity that assists you to do so, I would actually recommend that you use a real legal counsel that can assist you and navigate with you the service that you need to provide before even launching the product, because sometimes it's too late. You have launched, you have raised money, and you do not have a regulatory plan to move forward. So this is my answer to this. But I guess in Egypt, so if you're looking to provide any kind of fintech activities, now it's open. The only two things I guess we're still lacking. One is the digital signature, having this AKYC or digital signature. That is one of the main barriers for fintechs in all the spaces, because basically we still have to have this wet signature. So you need to have this physical visit to your customer, whether you're providing your service to an SME or an individual, you have to have this wet signature. And two is actually building this regulation towards crowdfunding, because basically this is one of the main established services already existing in most of MENA. At the end of the day, one of the best regulatory systems I saw regulating crowdfunding was developed in Bahrain. So when it comes to cryptocurrencies, digital currencies, crowdfunding, I see that Bahrain is taking the lead. Dubai is following pretty hard on the regulatory body. And I do believe in Egypt, we still have to navigate this for a bit.
Thank you, Ahmed.
That's going to take a while. The crypto is going to take a while. And I actually think Noah may have a perspective, but I actually think that's okay. We have a lot of other stuff to focus on before we get to crypto. Not that crypto isn't a great opportunity, and as an investor, obviously would love to be able to make some investments there. But honestly, I think the size of the market and the opportunities is still very, very big and lots of things to do. I agree definitely, Ahmed, with you on the EKYC/wet signature thing. Although I've seen entrepreneurs solve that one very creatively, I have to say. So you just get out and make it happen, right? That's what they did at the end of the day, and that's fine. I guess what I would say is we are passing phase one of fintech. A lot of phase one was infrastructure, payments, wallets, getting people into the system. With the InstaPay or the ACH or whatever you want to call it, that now is going to allow people to interoperable between banks and their wallets and the digital and all of that, we're going to enter phase two, right? And phase two are going to be much more focused on finer segments. So, parents or workers or employees or middle class, upper class, lower class. I mean, it will be all different segments, giving them user experiences and products that is suitable for them, right? So that's kind of the next phase, if you like. It's a phase right before digital bank. I know everybody's eager to get to digital banks and thinks that, the golden goose, but I actually think the way Egypt is going about it, from kind of let's get the first layer in, and then let's get the second layer in, and then we get to this world of digital banking deposits, which is, to Omar's point earlier, a very complicated and a very sensitive topic, right? Is how this market is evolving. So now you're seeing Fintech 2.0, and I'm seeing things like fractional investing in property is one of the things that's popping around Egypt quite a bit. Taking an old business like factoring and like what Ahmed is doing and digitizing that so that it's seamless, or car buying financing. Those are all the things that are to me, Fintech 2.0 that's starting to happen now.
Great, thank you, Basil. Noha, anything you would like to add to close this conversation before we move to Q&A?
Well, actually, it's like everything has been said. I just like to elaborate a little bit about what Basil has said. Fintech 101 was the challenging part, like you've said it all. Innovation is always driven by the market. You are not going to find a regulator in the world who would take charge of driving innovation in a financial industry. But again, there were barriers in there, and those barriers have been broken already. So we had a lot of taboos in there, and those taboos have been broken. Now entrepreneurs have all the capacity and the freedom to develop. Those who operated in the gray area, who actually took initiative and had the courage to push and then push back and the like, are the ones who changed the status quo. And we will continue to owe them a lot. We are living in exciting times. Banks are digitizing processes. They are partnering with startups, fintechs, insurtechs, and the like. We are witnessing an evolution in offering finance. We see embedded finance as the next step and next stage of offering financial services in there. You do not have to build a standalone app or have your own web portal or the like. You just have to integrate yourself as a part of the life experiences of the day-to-day activities of individuals, businesses, and the like, to be able to scale and scale quickly. This is another trend that we see in there. The central bank launching their sandbox to open that channel of communication, because they are mandated by law to only deal with banks, because they only regulate banks more or less. So a way around that was to actually build that sandbox in there where startups can actually approach the central banks, share models and the like. And I know that the Financial Regulatory Authority is currently in the process to start either their own or to partner with the central bank to have a joint one together, since every startup in there has a payment element in it. So it makes perfect sense to club that together. So again, we live in exciting times, we need to see a lot more capable individuals with the industry know-how and knowledge take that step and the leap to build their own businesses and start their own fintech startups. That 112, we actually need 100 more of the 112. So we need like 10,000 of those across savings, investment, lending. No more payments, please, we've done enough. Looking into asset tokenization. It's like who mentioned that the fractional Basil when you was talking about the real estate selling parts and of businesses. That's a clear example on asset tokenization. We can push for that. We need to get the lower segment into investing, the middle income families into investing to drive the economy and economic growth around the country. And that's what technology brings to the table. It facilitates services to new segments that were never on the radar of financial service providers. So those are exciting times in there. Before we move on to questions, now, if we look at Morocco, you have already started. You've had a couple of steps where regulations are concerned, but you really need to bring like the Bank Al Maghreb, like BAM, together with the CNDP, together with the capital market, the Moroccan Capital Markets Authority, to work together and build that enabling infrastructure. Whether it's regulators, the filling gaps in there, whether it's the regulatory sandbox, perhaps an incubator that facilitates growing that pipeline of fintechs in the country, and of course, a venture fund that can back them up early stage as they scale and grow. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Noha. And yes, there are initiatives that are being taken by in Morocco by the authorities, by the central bank, in partnership with public-private bodies, and there is a sandbox being in place, and there are a few like organizations pushing for that and building the infrastructure for it. So we are very hopeful and excited about what's going to happen, and we hope that those learnings will serve to get insights and visibility on what's happening and how others have been doing it. So thank you so much, all of you, for all those great insights. So there's a lot of learnings here, we can move on to questions, and it would be great to answer them.
Absolutely, Kenza. Thank you very much to you all. And I just wanted to precise something. So Omar was inviting the Moroccan startups to come to Egypt to launch. The idea is to learn from Egypt and launch the startups in Morocco. Okay, so the idea is also to be launching Moroccan startups in Morocco. So we're inviting the Egyptian startups to come to Morocco and launch their startups in Morocco, right? So that was just for this. Thanks again for all those insights. So I have some questions to you all, basically. So we'll start with one that maybe the three of you and Kenza as well could answer. How did the Central Bank of Egypt and other stakeholders manage to convince lawmakers on such vast and groundbreaking regulation changes to let fintechs operate in a guarded banking environment? So what was the secret sauce actually to kind of like shake things up?
Entrepreneurs taking initiative, building businesses, some of them even going to market, taking advantage of that gray regulatory area that was there. And then the regulators were in a place that's like, what is happening in the country? Who are these people? What services are they offering? What's the impact? What's the systemic risk that is there? What are the challenges that may face the consumers being served by those startups and the like? And that's it. And then you see investors. Okay, so there are investors backing up those businesses, putting money in there. So this is serious. We need to start to look into that. So it was driven by the market. And then, of course, we started the non-for-profit in a time where no non-for-profits were established in the country. So it was a decision to seize granting licenses to non-for-profits in the country. And we managed to push for it because there was a need in the market of a market enabler, a not-for-profit that brings together everybody to the same table. Because everybody, there were like fractioned efforts out there. Everybody wants to do something, but they're not coming together. So it all started by courageous entrepreneurs who took the step, seen the need in the market, acted on closing that gap in there and fulfilling the needs of customers, and persistence. And then courageous financiers as well and investors who backed those entrepreneurs up. And this is when the regulators were in a place where, okay, we need to sit, we need to talk, we need to see what is happening in there. Otherwise, it's going to be too late. But that's the point. This is where you start.
Can I add a small thing, Noah, if you don't mind?
Sure.
There was also, so the entrepreneurs weren't just talking directly with the regulator. Remember, again, the regulator regulates the banks.
True.
And so what they were doing, they were going to the banks and basically saying, we can help you make your businesses bigger, more profitable. We can reach customers that you don't want to serve because you're too expensive to serve them, for example, right? And then getting them on their side to help them with the discussion with the regulator. So there is a layer in between here that sometimes also gets missed, is that these banks have to, and I'm willing to bet that in Morocco, there are some very forward-thinking individuals, not necessarily the whole bank, but individuals within those banks who understand that fintechs can do things that they will never be able to do because their cost of serving them is just way too high, or the technology needed is not available within the bank. And if you get the banks on your side, then now you're going with the bank as a founder to the regulator saying, I need to be able to do X, Y, Z. And there was a long period of time in Egypt where they weren't issuing licenses or issuing regulation. They were issuing something called NOCs, right? Which is basically another gray zone area where you kind of say, we have no objection for you to do this. Now, that doesn't mean they're saying yes. It doesn't mean saying no. They're just saying we don't have an objection. And this helped overcome the idea that we need a law and we need a license by creating this kind of area where, hey, you can try this out and give us the feedback, and then we'll see how we evolve. So just, again, I'm mentioning some of the more detailed tactics on top of what Noah said to say, of course, the tenacity was always there, and the opportunity is big to drive that tenacity for the entrepreneurs. We're seeing a big opportunity, but they got some of the banks on their side as well, and that was super helpful.
That's true, and thank you for this specific answer. There is a question to Ahmed. As a former legal specialist, so what are the best practices you could advise the regulators to follow? So what have you seen there in order to develop a fintech ecosystem here in Morocco, I guess?
Actually, to start with, one of the things is the age of hiring. So basically, back when I joined alongside one colleague only, and we're the only people joining new hires under 30 years old. So basically, this one was one of the important factors, I do believe. So basically, if you do maintain only the old people in this certain organization or administrative body, cannot actually evolve. This is one of the things. Two is actually opening or having this direct connections with the ecosystem itself. So hearing more from the stakeholders, various stakeholders. And as I see now in Egypt, we're seeing a lot of improvement on this. So basically, one of the things that's conducted every year now with support of the GIZ program is basically having this fintech retreat, which connects various stakeholders, connecting people from the central bank, from the FRA, and from the startup scene. So basically, this was new to Egypt, having or convincing regulators not only to join a round table, but also to join you and have this friendly talk on the beach. I do believe it made a lot of difference. It was easier. It was breaking a lot of barriers. So those are the two main things that actually are in our hands. And also one of the things I have witnessed recently in Egypt is having these visionaries when it comes to hiring heads of administrative bodies, people now that come have this different experience. They're not just employees that spent 20 years and plus in the same place. They're people from the private sector. So they feel the pain, they feel the change, and they actually act upon it. So those, I guess, are the main factors I do believe assisted in building a better regulations for Egypt.
Thank you very much for this answer. And I totally agree with this line of conduct, basically. To basically continue there, and I have another question that could be interesting, is about open innovation in the fintech ecosystem. Is this in play in the ecosystem in Egypt? And if yes, at what extent? Does it help? Yes, no? What could you say about that?
Well, it's there. Is it as mature and as spread as we would want it to be? No, not really. So you have a couple of players within the banking industry, a couple of players within the insurance, a spin-off of an investment bank value. But again, there is still a lot to be done. We have 38 banks in the country. They should all be engaged in open innovation initiatives, partnering with startups, investing in startups, sponsoring accelerators, incubators, and the like. They should be playing their role in there. The insurance companies are I mean, it's the exact same status that is there. Things are changing. Like now you see government-owned banks, insurance companies, and the like, taking steps to engage. Even if they don't have the capacity to engage directly, they would start funds, and that is an indirect way to support and engage with it in the innovation ecosystem. An ecosystem is a natural being. It takes its time to grow, develop, and the like. So as long as you started, you planted that seed, one took initiative, one entity, one bank, one insurance company, you are going to get there, rest assured. Yes, exactly. The speed at which you get there, of course, is determined by the rest of the ecosystem, the inputs of the rest of the players, people doing their part, organizations taking initiative and doing their part as well. Does it exist? Yes, it does. Is it where it should be for such an advanced market who's had financial industry, financial services offered for like 150 years? No, it's not. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done in there. The institutional innovators, the innovation departments and teams within organizations need to exist. They need to be there. And I'm not just talking, again, finance now is not about financial service providers who are licensed. Finance now is about everybody and anybody who has access to a customer base. So if it's a telecommunications company, they can partner with service providers, financial service providers, and offer financial services. If they are FMCGs who run large base of merchants and distributors and the like, they can partner with financial service providers to offer financial services. I invite everybody to compete against banks, insurance companies, investment banks, and the like, to see that ecosystem evolve and grow at a much, much faster pace. This is only driven by innovation, and innovation is only driven by one person in every and each organization. We need to grow those, nurture those, give them a chance, make sure the platforms that have those people heard are established and created and are there. So that's it. I hope that has answered your question.
Absolutely. First of all, I want to thank Basil, who was active on the webinar, but also in the Q&A, because he answered to many people who were actually asking questions there. And there are a lot of things that have to be said about this ecosystem. I'm sure that we will be doing a part 2, because we're running out of time. I will still have one last question to Kenza, basically. Thank you for the moderation. You're active in many countries in Africa and also in Egypt. You are Moroccan, so you know the Moroccan ecosystem. if you had to like share 2 or 3 things that you saw in Egypt that you would like or would love to see here in Morocco, or some advices, you are in both ecosystems. What would that be? And we will be closing on that.
Sure, thank you, Saad. Well, I think our speakers said it all. I think the main insights that I'm getting here is that, well, and that we have seen actually in the ecosystem, but I wanted to really share that and make sure that those are understood. Well, first, there is a specific regulatory body that is working with startups and facilitating these licenses. And so these are micro licenses, so it's fragmented licenses that are accessible to startups. It's still hard to get them, and it still requires a lot of work with regulators. But I think it's important that Morocco also, fragments those licenses and provide access to them with different level of complexity. So this is one. And then I would say enabling innovation before regulating, and this is key. And we've seen that in Kenya, we've seen that in Nigeria, we've seen that in Egypt. So enabling entrepreneurs to really try out their solutions on the market and work, and have MVPs with first clients, etc., before issuing the law that regulates that. And look, other countries that do it with in sandboxes or without sandboxes, but it's like on a small scale, and then they regulate, but they don't block innovation. And this is key for this ecosystem in Morocco to grow and to enable innovation, to enable fintech. So those are the 2 key insights that I would like to share. And of course, investment, access to funding, but this is available. So you just need the right talents that create the right opportunity and thinking big. So we don't have the same size of the market that Egypt has. So it's something that can start in Morocco and grow and scale across the region, and it's possible. So thank you so much.
One thing I can say in there, like after Kenza quickly, and actually I'll be answering a question as well. We are working with the UN Capital Development Fund on a passporting initiative for fintech startups, African fintech startups, that to facilitate their cross-border expansion, so they won't have to go through the regulatory processes in more than one country when they wish to expand. And that's part of the Africa Fintech Network initiatives and projects that are there. There are many others. We don't have time in there, but I would encourage everybody who needs help or support expanding into the Egyptian market, launching in the Egyptian market, seeking support and help with regulators to actually reach out, and would be more than happy to help and in every way possible.
Thank you very much. Basil, Ahmed, maybe one last word before we leave.
I guess the only thing was, which is to say, thank you guys, thank you Kenza, thank you Saad, of course, and for this opportunity to join such a great panel. So basically, I guess myself, I heard a lot of things that I needed to hear from Basil and Noha. So thank you guys as well, and hope we have a part of this conversation.
We will, for sure. We will. There is a lot of things that that still has to be said. Thank you, Basil, as well, for your time, and thank you all for your time. Thank you, Omar. Thank you, Noha. Thank you, Basil. Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Kenza. So that was the webinar about the Egyptian fintech ecosystem. As we said, we will be for sure be having a part 2, because there are still things that needs to be done and to be said and to be analyzed. And we'll get back to you also with what we will be making and advancing in Morocco as well. So thank you again. And just to be sharing so as part of the animation of the Africa Innovation Lab, we have those webinars that we organize, but also a podcast that we have, that a monthly podcast. And for sure, I will be inviting you guys to discuss in it, maybe to discuss about what you're doing with the Africa Fintech Network, Noha, and also with all the VC part from you, Basil. And Ahmed, we will be following you as well with your startup. So thank you all for having been there, and see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.